Hello and welcome to the gameplay cast review for the first-person action shooter Warhammer 40k Darktide. Darktide is a 4-player co-op game developed and published by Fatshark. The gameplay is very similar to Fatshark's other title, Vermintide. The clue's in the name, I guess. Tide, Vermintide, Darktide. Back 4 Blood and its stupid card system was the last game I played similar to this, and if, like me, you were a tad disappointed with Back 4 Blood, then the similarities may have been concerning. So is this a Vermintide 2 victory, or a Back 4 Blood flop? Thankfully, it's a Vermintide style victory at this point. Despite my initial concerns, the games grew on me, and considering it's on Xbox Game Pass, I think you should definitely give this game a go. Currently, the plot centres on a squad of inquisitorial agents recruited to help deal with a Nurgle-based infiltration of the Hive city Tertium on the industrial planet of Atoma Prime. The opening sees the player as a convict on a prison transport ship. Fortunately for the player, the vessel is attacked by Nurgle's followers and the player is able to escape. During your escape, you assist a member of the Inquisition, Explicator Zola, and as a result, you are simultaneously rescued and conscripted into the Inquisition. Once you arrive at their base of operations, the Morningstar, you are able to select and deploy on various missions to root out and prevent heresy within the Hive. There isn't really a central narrative running through the game, as each individual mission is not necessarily linked. The story or narrative is developed through cutscenes on the Morningstar as the player levels. I personally prefer a stronger narrative in my games, but it is planned that this will develop over time as the game is taking a live service style approach around an already determined narrative. And I'll admit the prospect of an evolving narrative and story for this type of game is interesting and could be really rewarding, so I'm willing to give the developer a chance, even if this has led to the inclusion of a premium currency for skins and vanity items, which we'll talk about later. I did this review off the back of my retro review for the original Space Marine game, a game I criticised for its poor textures and set dressing. Darktide is the polar opposite. The attention to detail is awesome, the setting and lore is on point, totally in keeping with the dark gothic vibes of the 41st millennium. The voice acting and cutscenes are pretty good too. The game allows you to select one of 4 classes, each of which can be highly customised. The 4 classes consist of a human veteran, human zealot, ogryn, and human psyker. All classes have a regenerating shield, also known as toughness. The veteran is a straight up sharpshooter, and is the class I played the most. The zealot is a melee focused class with some range attack, the ogryn is more of a tank, perfect for holding back the hordes of enemies, and the psyker is essentially a magic user, able to deal high damage to enemy elites and control hordes with the pushback from their warp charges. I chose the veteran because my unwritten rule in gaming is to always, and I mean always, pick the basic boring soldier class. I guess I'm just a bit of a basic bitch. So after a surprisingly detailed character creation process, I was onto the tutorial, which was short and sweet, just the way it should be. I got the basics, the rest you learn as you play, or if you go to the advanced tutorials. Unfortunately, these were quite dull, though thematic, and not too long. This is where my experience took a turn for the worse as I loaded into my first real mission. There I was, picking targets off with my las rifle, my party of bots running around me. Next thing I knew, I was on a bridge getting shot by snipers and penned by waves of enemies. Real players had joined me by now, and we were ducking and diving, trying to push the Nurgle heretics back. I just lined up a shot on a sniper when all of a sudden I'm dragged back and imprisoned in some kind of net. I then get to watch as my party goes down and we fail the mission. Now, I'm not one to be denied, so I tried a couple more times and succeeded in completing a mission or two, but I went to bed that night pondering if this was a game I would actually enjoy. The next day I tried again, and this was where the game finally began to click. Once I realised the importance of sticking with your party, the game seemed to fall into place. I naturally play a lot of games with a lone wolf mentality, and that just doesn't fly in this game. But more than that, the developers actually included a mechanic where your toughness regenerates faster when you are close to your allies. This is referred to in the game as coherency, which I think is a touch of pure genius. Your success or lack thereof in this game really depends on your party and you working as a team, and this mechanic at least incentivizes players to stick together. Combat itself is generally manic, with hordes of enemies throwing themselves at you, while specials snipe, throw grenades, or try to engulf you in green flames. This isn't even accounting for the bosses. many of which have instant kill moves. Fighting through the missions is great fun, especially when you party up with 3 of your friends. The shooting isn't the most refined, but it's on point and satisfying, though in my view playing as a veteran, there's room for improvement. Being able to do a melee pushback with the gun for instance would be a start, as once enemies get in close, it's time to switch out for your melee option. Fighting enemies up close is potentially more dangerous, as they often try to surround and overwhelm you. Fortunately, you regenerate toughness when you fight with melee, you can block, you can push enemies close to you back before holding down the attack button for a heavy attack to explode a few heads. All in all, smashing enemies with your sword is satisfying. Although I'll cover this more later, I do think the melee is a bit overpowered and over-relied on. Thank God Fat Shark went with an RPG leveling and a customizable loadout for the game. The cards in Back 4 Blood straight up sucked, and it's nice to be able to create, level and equip a character to suit my style. Combining RPG character development, custom mission selection, and the narrative being driven from story scenes on board the Morningstar creates a form of storytelling perfectly suited to this type of game, and as a player I can totally appreciate the fact that I'm creating my own story. Each time you hit a level up, you unlock better gear, and sometimes some shiny new items, and for completing each mission you get a mixture of coins and materials that you can then use to purchase upgrades and cosmetics. Not to be confused with the premium cosmetics, which have a separate economy, and I'll whinge about these later in the review.
It is your destiny.
As mentioned earlier, the game looks pretty damn good. It's not the best graphics you're ever going to see, and the player character detail, particularly their hair, won't blow you away. But as you play most of the game in first person, you're not likely to care too much, and as a combined package, the game looks great. Plenty of detail, atmospheric lighting, it ticks all the boxes. I was playing on PC as the console version was still in the works at this point, and in terms of graphical performance, the game ran smoothly on maximum settings. There were definitely a few graphical pops as I was loaded into games, particularly games that I joined late, but other than the obvious of turning the awful motion blur off, I really don't get why games do this. I've not really got any complaints. Generally, it's been solid and looks as pretty as a Nurgle-possessed plague bearer should. Beautiful. Okay, let's start with the elephant in the room. The cosmetic currency monetization mechanic. Currently, this isn't a problem, but it's clearly something to watch. If this stuff sticks to cosmetics only, the game will be fine. However, the second the game strays into pay to win or other nefarious practices, it's game over for me. And all this depends on the player base and greed of the developer. As long as they have a decent player base and are making some money from the cosmetics, this should be okay. But if they get greedy or the player base falls and they need more money for the next phase of the game, the temptation to add better weapons or armor to the shop, creating a pay-to-win scenario, will increase. As it is, it's just cosmetics, although honestly I'd rather they just charged for expansions like they did in the old days. And maybe finish the game first. That'd be nice. Now that that moan is out of the way, I can get into the nitty-gritty of the game. Firstly, I've had a few server glitches where the game booted me out. My controller even went haywire once and I had to restart. Nothing out of the ordinary for the first few weeks of an online-based PC game, but still frustrating. In terms of the combat, I need to make a confession here first that I haven't played much of Vermintide 2, which I think is still on Game Pass and on my need to play list. So some of this is a bit of conjecture on my part. The reason I mention this is because I do have an issue with the game's combat, at least from the veteran, like the sharpshooter's point of view. Combat seems very biased towards melee. I think this is possibly because the combat is based on the same mechanics as Vermintide 2, or built from them, which considering that the game is mainly a melee or close range focused combat system, I think goes somewhere to explaining my issues. In short, it just felt like most of the encounters outside of special enemies are much more effectively dealt with just using melee, especially when a horde comes. You'll see this reflected in gameplay as players just run in circles swinging their weapons madly, and it usually works. Yes, there's definitely some parts where enemies with guns attack and I can stand back and pick them off, kind of doing my job for the party, but you can usually charge down said enemies and hack them down with melee, or I'm instantly surrounded too, so I can't really sit back and snipe. Moreover, this has similar tropes to the ones Back 4 Blood had, and these are just really frustrating from a gameplay point of view. Enemies that appear from nowhere and have unblockable pinning moves, so you just get to sit there watching your character die with no way to escape unless a member of your party intervenes. I get that it's a team game, but it's so dull just sitting there waiting to be rescued. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but the game plays exactly like Back 4 Blood in some ways. It's going good until it's not. Some encounters I seem to be able to withstand a lot of damage, and others I take a few hits and I'm basically dead. It could be the group toughness effect or particular party configurations, but it's not fun at times. Equally, I can't not mention the fact that bots suck as party members, again just like Back 4 Blood. Thankfully, the game will load players in quite quickly as you play. I guess what I'm trying to say is the balancing doesn't feel quite right to me. Melee seems too effective and too frequent, while combat damage can vary wildly. Part of this is certainly the type of game that this is, but I feel it could have been tuned a bit more. Maybe I just prefer a more linear experience, as opposed to the frantic hordes you get here. Now, I couldn't really do an issue section without mentioning certain things in the game. Firstly, the repetition of the missions and the reuse of enemies does become an issue if you're going to sit there and play the game for long periods of time, as they're all going to be the same shade of green basically, and you will see the same enemies, the same maps, and the same bosses and specials used over and over again. This is probably due to the game being in its initial release stage, but that in itself is an issue because they've basically released the game in kind of like an open beta. Because the game isn't technically fully finished yet, you've got very limited crafting and reward options from the in-game shops and missions. This isn't necessarily a massive issue, but I've seen other reviewers, and I kind of have to agree with them, say that how have they managed to get a completed premium shop with loads of premium options and getting that mechanic sorted when they haven't managed to sort out some of the basic game mechanics and, haven't built the crafting system? Why have they prioritized the premium shop? Obviously because it generates money, supposedly, or it must do. People love these cosmetics and skins. Why, I don't know. But the point is if you're going to have the premium shop completed, I kind of feel like the rest of the game should have been a bit further on, or you should have delayed the release of the premium shop. Those are concerns I can totally agree with. So let's get into the final summary. There's a subtlety to this game that I only started to appreciate after about 5 hours of playing. Despite the literal chaos that ensues during most of the bigger fights, there is a skill to the melee dance of death. Take out or suppress the enemies that engage you at range, and for the Emperor's sake, stick with your party. The choose your own path approach to the missions and how it links into the narrative doesn't create a story-driven experience. It does, however, give the game enough structure and interest to keep you playing, while making this the perfect pick up and play a game. You can literally log in, play a 20-minute session, and leave it for a week. You don't need to remember what bit of the quest you're at, who you'd spoken to, or any of the other narrative-heavy tropes. You just log in, group up with your party, kill Chaos Scum, and log out. In this, I think the game has a market, especially considering how bad Back 4 Blood did, in my opinion. And it may be too early to say this, but the game has good prospects for the future too. That said, the developer needs to make sure to add new content and more variety to ensure the game continues to develop. The current crop of missions are very samey after a while, as are the enemies. I also stand by my comments on the game being a bit too melee heavy. I feel the gunplay could have been beefed up a bit more to compensate. Equally, while I have grown to appreciate the game's combat, my gut feel is it's still telling me it could be better. I think I wanted something a bit more innovative. Left 4 Dead is undoubtedly an inspiration for elements of this game, and though it looks great and tweaks the formula well in some areas, the coherency mechanism is genius. I think a bit more could have been done to make the combat experience better. For starters, the unblockable pinning enemies still suck. Maybe they tried it and it didn't work, but I don't see why we couldn't add a button bashing escape mechanism. You could still take significant damage and be pinned for an amount of time, but at least giving the player a chance to get out or just interact with the game in some way, would be good. Anyway, I've had that rant. All in all, the changes to the formula that have been made are good, but I think could have and should have gone further. In combination with some of the other issues I've had with the game and the fact it's probably kind of a beta still and not really 100% finished, the highest I can score this game is a 7 out of 10. It's a good game. In time, I'm almost certain it will be a very good game when more content is added and the narrative progresses. This is all assuming the developer and the publisher avoid the temptation to monetize more than just cosmetics. Currently, all is well, and this is a fantastic game to just pick up and play with your friends. If you want to check out Darktide following this review, it's available on Steam, Xbox Game Pass for PC, and is coming to consoles soon. This concludes the Gameplay Cast review of the first-person shooter, Darktide. I've been Tim from Gameplay Casts, you've been awesome, and all that's left for me to say is peace out, and thanks for watching.